Thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate, I speak on behalf of the Realignment Committee. They've been putting in a lot of time into this process, and they're at a spot where they've narrowed the scenarios that they've been looking at down to 2 scenarios. And they're at this point in the process, we'd like to just show some things to you and get some feedback from you as well. Before we get started, my name is Matthew Cropper with Cropper GIS Consulting. I'm the facilitator who's been working on this process and helping to facilitate the work of the committee. And then we also have the Realignment Committee members here as well. If you're on the Realignment Committee, if you could just raise your hand. And so we have about 14 Realignment Committee members here tonight as well. And they're going to be around the maps after we give our presentation tonight so that you can have some close-up conversations with them and myself. But before we do that, we have a little presentation just to give you an overview on the process and just kind of to bring you up to speed with everything that's occurred so far. So we are Cropper GIS Consulting and McKibben Demographic Research. We are K-12 planners, and we work with school districts all over the country. We do just this type of work all over the U.S., so realignment plans, population enrollment forecasting, and facility planning. And like I said, we've done this work with districts everywhere from 2,000 to 200,000 students, and all over the United States. So we bring a lot of perspective on what has worked and what hasn't worked in other communities, as well as a technical expertise in providing mapping data and information, statistical information, to help make this process very efficient and accurate. The purpose of tonight is for you to learn how this process has been working. Really we'd like you to learn from us, but also we'd like to learn from you and hear some of your thoughts and some of your concerns. We've heard a lot throughout this entire process from people across this county, and as it's been open, and we've had a lot of emails, thousands of emails so far, and we continue to study those. But tonight's really an opportunity for you to talk with us around maps and to express some of your thoughts. To review these maps outside in the hall, we have 3 copies of maps so that there's no bottleneck around maps, and committee members and myself will be scattered about so that we can help you orient yourself with the maps and help you understand how you may be impacted and how the options differ. But finally, the most important thing is all the conversations that you have tonight are very helpful and very good and healthy to have, but we'd really like you to put your comments and your input onto a survey. And anybody can fill out this survey. Adults, the children can fill out the survey if you have students that like to. And you can also tell people who were not able to make it tonight that they can also participate in this survey. Tonight is not an open mic type format where people get in line and speak their voice on the microphone. And the reason is that this is a data collection effort for us so that we can collect as much input and information as possible. If you want to voice your opinion or voice your concerns, you can do that via the realignment email, or there's a Let's Talk method. When all of those get sent to myself, I see them as soon as they come in, and I read every single one, and they all get shared with the committee. And we've had thousands of those emails come through, and that's really the best way for you to provide your individual input so that the whole committee can benefit from that. But the survey tonight is designed just to get your thoughts and observations around the maps that have been narrowed down. So why are we doing this? Why is realignment occurring at this point in time? And the reason is that the school board has initiated this process to try to get a little bit closer to the neighborhood school concept, to try to get students closest to their homes if at all possible. So we're looking at proximity to schools and where these communities are in relation to where they're going, and then what other schools are closer, and identifying if they can be assigned to a closer school than where they live right now, without having the school get overcrowded. And there are a lot of other factors that have to come into play, but the neighborhood school concept is something that is one of the strong objectives of this committee, to try to get students closer to home. In addition to that, the district has experienced changes in enrollment over time. So over time, some of these schools have become very overcrowded. There's some schools that have 19 portables sitting in the back of the property, and the playgrounds are no longer there, and they've got basically portables so that students can have a space to be educated. And likewise, there are other schools in the county that have underutilized conditions, and so there's an excess space in some spaces. So the objective is to try to align the enrollment of these buildings and make them equitable, so there's an equitable number of space in these schools, and that does require change. In addition, there are some classroom additions that are being planned per the bond program, and some of those are being accounted for too. And when you see the capacity data that we're working with, the capacity numbers do reflect the most recent capital improvement plan changes that are being planned for the bonds. And the capacity data also reflects changes that are happening at the state level as it relates to, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the state is in the process of reducing class sizes in, I think, K through third grades. And that has an impact on capacity. So those are also factored in. So there's a lot of things in play here at the state level, at the county level, and then also at the individual community level in terms of changes in time and utilization of schools. So this committee is charged, and we are charged to help the committee to explore and develop this options through a community-based process, to have an open and transparent process where the public can preview and watch the work of the committee as it unfolds, and then also to have an ongoing process of getting input and listening to the public as the process matures. Focus on developing options that best meet the UCPS realignment criteria, and I'll talk about the criteria in a second. And the full implementation is fall 2019, although the process, a lot of these boundaries could come into play in 2018-19 school year. Depending on the way it's looking now, it's very possible that this plan could be implemented in its entirety in the next school year, as opposed to a phased-in approach. When we started this process, we were thinking may need to be a phased-in approach based on the timing of different capital improvements. But the way it started to mature, it looks like it could potentially be implemented in its entirety in 1 year, which is the cleanest way to implement a realignment plan. So we were hired as outside third-party consultants as an objective point of view to develop materials to help facilitate the study. We prefaced this realignment study with the population enrollment forecast, and that gave us an outlook of 10 years, what the enrollment would look like in 10 years as time moves on. To facilitate this process, community-based process in an open, transparent manner, and really empower the public and the community to help make these decisions, to help provide recommendations. So it's not being done behind closed doors. It's being done with a volunteer group of people who live in this county, and they have done an outstanding job in trying to stay focused on the big picture here and not focusing on one neighborhood or one school or one student. And finally, we are here to leverage our expertise with technology and also expertise in doing realignment studies all across the United States. So the school district has approved a set of criteria, and these are the rules to follow when determining if a boundary line adjustment should be made. The committee always goes back to these criteria, and I always encourage them to say, if you want to make an adjustment, do an adjustment only if it brings you closer to adhering to these criteria, not deviating further away from them. These criteria are to maximize busing efficiencies and transportation of students, to establish clear feeder patterns and continuity. So we've been looking at if a school does need to be split from elementary to middle, try to have a balanced split if at all possible. And sometimes it's not as easy as it sounds, but they certainly have been mindful of it and they have data to analyze it. There are no middle to high school splits. All middle schools feed entirely into high schools in these plans. And so it's really elementary to middle school are some of the things that they have been looking at. Balanced school facility utilization, so trying to make sure that the schools are equitably used, and that one isn't at 120% utilized, while another one's at 40% utilization or 50%. So trying to make sure that there's an equitable number of space available in the schools as a result of their work. Looking at future growth, account for future growth. So not only growth, but also enrollment decline. As the demographic study, the result of the demographic study show that the west side of this county is actually in the process of, you're seeing increases in middle and high school, but the elementaries that are coming in and moving through the system are much smaller cohorts, or much smaller class sizes. So in the next 10 years, there is an anticipated decline, forecasted decline in enrollment, particularly in the Marvin cluster, and then Cuthberts and Weddington are also not far behind. On the east end of the county, it's more stable, and if you look at Monroe is slightly growing, and then the Porter Ridge and the Piedmont clusters and Parkwood are fairly stable to maybe a slight increase, but they're much more stable than what we're seeing on some of the communities on the west end. Another criteria are to allow for grandfathering, and so the school board is still in the process of evaluating grandfathering policy, but they have made some progress for grandfathering. And grandfathering means it's a method that's a policy-driven decision that's made by the school board to help further reduce the impact on students who may be finishing out some of their years or coming into the final years of their school in any particular level. So it's something that's commonly considered. And this is what the school board has determined so far, is that rising 10th through 12th graders, all sitting high school students, will be allowed to remain at the school which they're currently assigned to, as long as that they have transportation provided. The school district isn't going to transport students that opt for the grandfathering policy. Students otherwise eligible for grandfathering may be reassigned if the special program required to meet the needs of the student is not in the school which the student is currently assigned to. So if there's a special program that your child is participating in at a school, and they get reassigned to another school, that student is eligible to continue at the school they are if the program's not offered at the other school. And the policy committee will be considering additional grade levels, including rising ninth graders, elementary middle grades, and siblings once the additional demographic information is available. So as the committee continues to work towards a recommendation, the school board is working to finalize that grandfathering policy. And it's not uncommon for grandfathering policy to be finalized until after the plan is approved or recommended. Minimize the impact on students. So we have been looking at the number of students that would be impacted in any particular option, and there's data tables out there that shows how many students go from where they're going and how many students are moved from one school to another and things like that. I'm sorry, we're not answering any questions in this. So I'm sorry, sir, we can't have an open conversation. So minimizing the impact on students is something that they're being mindful of, and they are looking at areas that have been impacted, but there was a lot of impacts at the last process, and so it's not as easy as not moving them, because there was a lot of substantial changes in prior studies. But the committee is focused on trying to minimize the impact on students, and they are being mindful of that. To make every effort to establish contiguous zones, so don't create satellite zones. Trying to have one zone per school, which is something that exists in any of these plans. There are not any satellite areas, which you do see in some school districts. Use major roads and natural boundaries whenever feasible to define attendance boundaries. So trying to draw the lines along major roads, and that helps to improve transportation efficiency and also safety of students crossing over major roads, if it's at all possible. And all these criteria are in no particular order or priority, and the best plan is going to be one that touches on all of the criteria, but not focus solely on one element of the criteria. If you start to focus on one piece of the criteria, you start to deviate away from other parts, from other elements of the criteria. So the committee is understanding now, and I've been telling them from the start, that no plan is going to be perfect. There are going to be pros and cons with any plan, and that the best plan is the one that they feel best addresses the criteria as a whole. So when we started this process, we worked through collecting data and information from the school district. We collected the student information and mapped out all the students so we know where all the kids live in the school district, and we can count students on any particular street or subdivision. And we've used that information to develop what we call planning blocks. The city and county provides data for us, the subdivision data. I don't know if a lot of you have probably seen the interactive map where you can look at subdivisions and zoom to subdivisions. It's something that we use on a daily basis to study this county, and the public has also been using it extensively. And then census data and IRS data has been used a lot for the demographic side, for the forecasting, to understand migration and population and housing data and information. So we've taken this information and we converted it all into GIS, a Geographic Information System. One of the things that you've seen, you've heard a lot about, are planning blocks. Planning blocks are small building blocks for realignment. So think of them as pieces of a puzzle. You've got the elementary attendance areas, the middle and high school attendance boundaries, and then below that, there are small geographic areas that we call planning blocks. And these planning blocks are designed in a way that we're not splitting a subdivision in half, that we're trying to align communities together. So if a community has to move, they move in their entirety without splitting the line down a residential street or so on and so forth. And with each of these planning blocks, you'll notice on the maps when you look outside is that there are numbers associated with them. There's a planning block ID number, and that helps us understand if we get feedback from email. I live in this planning block ID, this planning block number. It helps us identify exactly which area they're talking about. But it also shows the number of students that live within each planning block, so that we're in between meetings, committee members can do homework and see, okay, if we move this planning block here, this is this many students, and that's how it would impact the school, or it may be too many to add to a school. So they use that to help develop options. And so we have planning blocks that cover the entire school district. And these planning blocks have been modified, adjusted throughout the process as we continue to get feedback from the committee and the public. We started the process with a background report that had some of the foundational information for the committee, the objectives and the realignment criteria, and a lot of that capacity and key information. But this information they have started with the binders 3 inches thick. The first packet had about a 1/4 inch of paper, but now as the process is nearing to the end, they've got probably two inches of paper in that binder. So information keeps, every committee meeting we're providing more information as the committee has requesting it, and all this information is available online. If you go to the Realignment webpage, there's a resources and documents link, and you can go to any committee meetings materials there and download and print off any materials that the committee has been presented. There's also the online map. So this map is croppermap.com/Union County, and this is an interactive map where you can use it on any device and look at the options. All the options are current on there, and also you look at the planning blocks, toggle on the labels for the planning blocks, zoom to subdivisions. It's a very useful tool. I use it 20 times a day. And I use it on a consistent basis to study the county as we continue to look at feedback from the public and also developing options. We started the process with some baseline options, which were basically starting points that Dr. McKibben and I drafted to put in front of the committee to get some of their initial input. And this really helps them hit the ground running so that they don't have to look at creating something from scratch with it. And it's a pretty overwhelming task if you're not an expert in technology in this process. But the committee started with these, and they really looked at them and marked them up, and they've really made a lot of changes and adjustments based on what they know, and with the areas and as it relates to transportation and where traffic is and where some of the bottlenecks of traffic are in the county and things like that. So I said that they really took these maps, marked them up to create maps, and so the original baseline options are no longer here. They are everything that you see now have been fully modified based off of input from the public and also ongoing work with this committee. So we really value an open and transparent process. We want you to understand what's happening so that you can follow the process. And it has been successful. We have received emails. I probably get 30 or 40 emails a day, and I do read them. We may not respond to your emails because of the volume of emails that we receive, but I can guarantee you that I've read every single email that comes across, whether it's the realignment email or Let's Talk. And anytime I see a new community that's been brought up, and that you mentioned, or a concern that you mentioned, I open the interactive map, I zoom right into the area, and I look at it. I study the numbers, I study your comments and feedback, and look at it in preparation for sharing with the committee. The committee has also received all these emails, and we do share these emails with them on an ongoing basis. A little bit about the committee. It's an 18-person committee. They were selected by the school district. And they were selected based on objectivity and geographic distribution. So we want to make sure that committee members don't all live in one particular neighborhood, that there's geographic distribution of this committee, and then the ability to attend the meetings, and they have been very good with this. And I think it's important to say that these committee members are not representatives of a school or a neighborhood or a community. They are here, the main value of this committee is to give us input on what traffic is like on the area that they shop and they live and they go to, they commute to and from work. They give us a lot of input on, well, there's a housing development going in there. You may want to cut this planning block where there's a future growth going to go here, and maybe not have this go to this school because the school's already at capacity. If you cut this planning block out of this school, it'll help prevent this school from becoming overcrowded with new development. Information like that has been just critical and very useful from this committee. And you know, one thing to note is that this committee, these are volunteers, they're parents and grandparents and members of the public. They are doing this for nothing other than the will to do things, make things better in this county. They have done their best to be objective. They're not expected to answer, to talk to each individual committee member in between meeting, or public member in between meetings, to engage in conversation with each member of the public. They're already asked to do a lot, and they have spent countless hours in this process and studying maps at committee meetings and in between meetings and discussions with me. So please be mindful of their time and understand that they are one part of this process. They are just tasked to provide a recommendation to the school board. And that recommendation, once it gets to the school board, is still a draft. Nothing is finalized until it gets approved by the school board. So just understand that this committee is doing the best they can, and it's all the 18 members, there's not driven by one single committee member. So one single committee member can't drive this process. And so please understand that, have some compassion for them, because they have spent a lot of time in this process. And it's intimidating when there's a lot of public members and subdivisions looking at them and pressuring them to do this and that. You know, they're doing the best they can, but they have to stay focused on the big picture. And I know that you as members of the public are thinking about your kids and your neighborhood, which is perfectly natural. But this committee has to think outside of that box and think on what's a plan that's best for all members of this, all people and all students in this county. So working with the committee, we've been working through this process. We had a public information session back in September. And you know, we've had several meetings, and so here we are on December 14th. There's one meeting after this public information session in January, on January 18th, where the committee will finalize a recommendation. We don't anticipate a lot of change made to these maps. We're really looking at, from this point on, minor adjustments to these maps. There may be more substantial changes that may be considered by the school board if the public feels the need to share those with them. But this committee has really done, I really feel like they have not left many stones unturned. Tonight's the opportunity, though. We'd like to hear from you if there's any information that we have not heard, communities we haven't heard about, or new information that's really the objective of tonight's meeting, is to get additional input from you. As I said, they met 7 times through this process and spent many hours between meetings, reviewing thousands of emails, and just done an outstanding job, and they should really be commended on the hard work that they've done. They reviewed over 14 variations of maps since the process started, so a lot of things that you may be suggesting are things that that have already been on a map that has been ruled out because of just for various reasons on trying to achieve our objectives. Looking at enrollment capacity and feeder pattern data and all the information I mentioned. And everything is draft throughout this process. And we will continue to explore things. There's still another meeting, and the committee is still looking at things. But they are starting to get closer to the end of their process as a committee. And once the committee's process is over, it starts to go into the hands of the board. And that's when it starts phasing out of the committee's work. And the school board takes ownership of the recommendation, and they determine what to do from there. So as I said, the maps that we have outside are the latest maps that have been narrowed down and carefully studied. And we're not expecting to make substantial adjustments and changes to these maps at this point. We're really looking at minor adjustments. You'll notice when you go outside that there's maps that show B West, and the western part of the county is colored in, but the eastern side has no color. And then there's also an F1 East, where the eastern side's colored in and the west has no color. And the reason why we were doing that is we didn't want to have the committee rule out a map that worked really well for one side of the county, but didn't work well for the east or the western side of the county. So what the committee did is as they've been evaluating these, they've determined that the B option that you see is good for the west end as a viable option, and then the F1 is good for the east. The B East didn't work. They didn't feel like it best met the criteria. So what we're going to do at the next committee meeting is we're going to merge these 2 options together leading into the January 18th meeting to have 2 options for them to consider as they work to their final recommendation. So they're looking to recommend an option to the Board of Education. Hopefully they'll have 1 recommendation, but any of the options that we will tell the story to the board and talk with them about the final options leading up to their recommendation, so the board understands the process and some of the final maps that were considered. So when you go out and look at the maps, you'll see the background colors represent the option. You'll notice there's a bold black outline on the option maps, and that bold black outline shows you where the current boundary is. So you can see where where areas have been changed. And committee members can certainly help you orient you with that. They have a lot of experience, as well as myself. As I said, B West and F1 East only apply to areas that are colored in. The areas that are not colored in basically are not being considered in that particular option. But so I would focus on the areas that are colored in and give us your insight and your opinions on the options that are the areas that are colored in. There are planning blocks on the map so that you could see how many students live inside the planning blocks. On the elementary maps, we have them. On the middle and high school maps, the planning block IDs, the numbers of students aren't on those maps, but there are the current boundary maps that show the numbers of students in those for reference. If you want to go back and look at the middle high school maps, you could see how many middle high school students live in various planning blocks on the maps that are posted on the walls. The statistics, all the statistics that the committee has been looking at are also posted in large format so that you can see the numbers. And this is the same number, the same data that the committee has been using as they continue to evaluate options. And we can certainly help you interpret that data if you need help. Tonight's a gallery walk format. Like I said, it's not an open mic type format, but it's really an open house where we're inviting you to look at the maps. Committee members and myself and staff will be walking around the maps and talking with you and answering any questions that you may have. But again, like I said, it's most important to fill out your survey and to give us that input as it relates to your feedback so that the entire committee can benefit from that input. The online survey begins tonight. It's live right now, and it's available through January the 2nd through midnight. We're going to get the data from them on January 3rd. We're going to take that information and put it into a summary report. If you go to the webpage, the UCPS webpage, you'll see that there are a quick links section to get to the survey, and you can go to the realignment page, and you'll see a survey. The survey link is right on the realignment page. So it should be pretty easy to find. What we're looking for, the most important feedback that really helps us is feedback, if there's any constructive feedback that you have. If you feel like a line is drawn down, splitting a subdivision or a neighborhood or anything like that, give us that input and let us know your thoughts on that. Maybe make some adjustments that we can make to better align these maps and to make sure that we don't impact and split communities. Next steps, the committee reconvenes one more time on January 18th, where they vote on a recommended plan. They will have your information to study the survey results. And the Board of Education will receive information on the final maps that have been considered along with the recommendations. So we will help tell the story with the board and tell them how the evolution of the maps and how the maps came to evolved into the recommendation that's being provided. If you have any further questions or comments other than the survey, we really want you to fill out the survey. That's the most important thing. And you can the PowerPoint and the maps are posted online. So anybody who couldn't make it tonight is free to please tell your neighbors to fill out and participate in the survey. There's also a tool called Let's Talk, which helps let you provide feedback and all that. As soon as that gets posted, it gets emailed directly to me, and then we also send that to the committee. So we are seeing those, even though we may not respond to them. But please continue to do that. And the public is welcome to attend these committee meetings as observers. We've had about 30 or 40 people at every committee meeting. And so you're welcome to come as observers, but not participate and not interrupt the work of the committee. But you are welcome to attend those if you'd like to. So with that, I think we're going to invite you out. There's a set of maps right outside the door, and there are also 2 sets of maps back and to the left inside the hallway, so that there's no bottleneck. Feel free to make your way out there, and the committee members and myself will be out there. So thank you very much. You have a happy holiday.